Modern borders don't tell you the truth, but your DNA does. And in the case of Germany, that truth reads like a contradiction. A genetic fingerprint built from peoples who should never have met, sharing bloodlines across millennia of war, migration, and survival. Today's German population descends from at least 4 major ancestral groups, each with its own genetic code, cultural revolution, and moment of dominance. From Ice Age hunters who carved flutes in glacial caves, to Anatolian farmers who transformed Europe with seeds and livestock, to Bronze Age horsemen who brought the Indo-European languages on horseback, to tribal warlords who later fused with Roman merchants and Slavic settlers. Germany's genome isn't just mixed, it's stratified like geological rock. And this isn't theory, it's hard science. Recent genetic studies, including massive datasets from ancient skeletons unearthed across Central Europe, show that modern Germans carry approximately 60 to 70% of their DNA from Neolithic Anatolian farmers, 20 to 30% from steppe herders like the Yamna, 10 to 15% from Ice Age hunter-gatherers, and smaller yet traceable portions from Romans, Slavs, Celts, and even North African migrants. Some lineages, like Y-DNA haplogroup R1BU106, are common in German males today, but originated far east of the Black Sea, spreading only after waves of steppe invasions 4,800 years ago. Others, like mitochondrial haplogroups H, U5, and K, reflect deep maternal roots in both Paleolithic Europe and Neolithic Anatolia. But what makes German DNA truly unusual isn't just the diversity, it's the order in which it arrived. The layering is so distinct, researchers can sometimes identify exact centuries when new ancestries appeared, buried in the bones of ancient farmers, warriors, and children found less than a meter apart in the same soil. So, how did this genetic jigsaw come together in a region once split by glaciers, later by empires, and now by highways? To find out, we have to start at the bottom of the ancestral stack. Not with empires, not with kingdoms, but with the last survivors of the Ice Age, who didn't just endure, but left their fingerprints in our bones. Before there were borders, tribes, or even agriculture, there were just people, scattered, shivering, and surviving in a land locked under ice. Between 45,000 and 15,000 years ago, Northern Europe was gripped by the last glacial maximum. Much of what is now Germany lay beneath massive glaciers, up to a mile thick. But just to the south, in a narrow belt of land stretching from modern France through southwestern Germany, life endured. These were the Western hunter-gatherers, a small population of early modern humans who managed to carve out an existence in one of Earth's harshest environments. And against all odds, they didn't just survive, they innovated. At sites like Urnfields and Geisenklosterle, archaeologists have found the earliest known examples of figurative art, including a 40,000-year-old ivory carving of a female figure, now called the Venus of Urnfields. Nearby, bone flutes with carefully carved tone holes suggest that these Ice Age Germans were creating music at a time when mammoths still roamed the plains. This wasn't just survival. This was culture. Genetically, these Paleolithic Europeans were distinct. Most carried Y chromosome haplogroup Y, one of the oldest paternal lineages found in Europe. Their maternal DNA was dominated by haplogroups U5 and U2, both of which are still present, though rare, in modern German populations. These lineages likely arose in Europe itself, making them deeply indigenous to the continent. But their numbers were small, likely no more than a few thousand across Central Europe. Harsh winters, limited food sources, and geographic isolation kept their populations fragile. Yet they developed key genetic adaptations. Efficient vitamin D synthesis, allowing them to thrive despite minimal sunlight. Genetic traits for fat storage and heat retention, helping them survive sub-zero temperatures. And possibly, psychological resilience for long, dark winters. Though this remains speculative, When the glaciers began to retreat around 15,000 years ago, these hunter-gatherers were among the first to reoccupy northern Germany. Their stone tools, bladelets, and burins spread alongside them, forming the Magdalenian culture, known for its stunning realism in cave art and advanced hunting tools. But even as the land warmed, their world was already changing. Their genetic legacy today is modest but measurable. Modern Germans retain approximately 10 to 15% of their ancestry from these Paleolithic peoples, with slightly higher concentrations in the north and east. Traits like blue eyes and lighter skin tones have been linked to these early Europeans, along with certain variants tied to metabolism and cold adaptation. Still, their time as Europe's dominant population was coming to an end, because around 8,000 years ago, a new kind of human arrived, one not shaped by the hunt, but by the harvest. And with them came a revolution that would forever alter the genetic and cultural fabric of Europe, including the DNA of modern Germany. Roughly 8,000 years ago, the forested hills and rivers of Central Europe were still ruled by scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, until one of the most transformative events in human history arrived from the southeast. These were not warriors, but farmers, and they didn't come with swords. They came with seeds. From the region of modern-day Turkey, known in prehistory as Anatolia, an entirely different kind of human society began expanding into Europe. They brought with them domesticated wheat and barley, sheep and goats, polished stone tools, and permanent architecture. This was no slow cultural shift. It was a demographic wave that swept the continent. Within just a few centuries, these Neolithic pioneers, associated with the linear Bandkeramik (LBK) culture, had reached the Rhine Valley, and with them came a genetic shockwave. DNA from Neolithic skeletons in Germany shows that these newcomers almost completely replaced the local male population. Y-DNA studies reveal that the hunter-gatherer lineages, like haplogroup 1, were rapidly replaced by haplogroup G2A, which originated in the Near East. On the maternal side, new lineages such as H, T, J, and K took root, virtually absent before. So why were farmers so dominant? The answer isn't conquest, it's capacity. Farming villages could support 10 to 20 times more people than hunter-gatherer bands. Over time, the farmers didn't need to fight. They simply outnumbered and absorbed the foragers. But genetics tells us this wasn't one-sided. It was a mosaic, not a takeover. Sites like Blätterhöhle Cave in western Germany reveal a nuanced picture. Intermarriage between Anatolian settlers and local hunter-gatherers. Interestingly, this mixing wasn't equal. Hunter-gatherer men were more likely to join farming communities, while female ancestry remained dominantly Anatolian. These early farmers didn't just reshape genes, they transformed the land. They introduced rectangular longhouses, fired pottery, and the first clear signs of social hierarchy. They also brought the idea of private property, dividing land, managing herds, storing grain. This shift from mobile living to sedentary farming redefined how people related to each other. And to power. By 5000 BCE, Neolithic farming culture dominated across most of Germany. These Anatolian migrants and their descendants formed the genetic backbone of modern Europe, including 60 to 70% of the DNA in present-day Germans. But even as their roots took hold, a storm was forming far to the east, one that would arrive not on foot, but on horseback. By around 3300 BCE, Europe had been shaped by two major ancestral waves, Ice Age hunter-gatherers and Anatolian farmers. But the third, and arguably most explosive genetic transformation came not from within Europe, but from far to the east. On the windswept grasslands north of the Black Sea, the Yamna culture, also known as Yamnaya, was rising. These weren't sedentary farmers or cave dwellers. They were herders, warriors, and pioneers, living in mobile societies centered around cattle, wagons, and horses. And with them came something Europe had never seen before: mobility at scale. They moved fast, in family-based groups that could travel hundreds of miles with their herds. They were among the first people to domesticate horses, giving them unmatched range and speed in both warfare and migration. Genetically, their arrival was a tidal wave. They carried a new paternal lineage. Y-DNA haplogroup R1bM269. This lineage quickly became dominant across much of Western Europe and remains the most common male haplogroup in Germany today, especially in the north and west. But their impact wasn't just biological, it was linguistic. The Yamna brought with them a Proto-Indo-European language, which eventually splintered into nearly every major European language family: Germanic, Celtic, Italic, and Slavic. Their genes and words traveled together, embedded in each migrating family line. Archaeologically, the Yamna people were masters of metallurgy and burial engineering. They constructed kurgans, large earthen burial mounds, to honor elite males with bronze axes, horse remains, and elaborate grave goods. Their social structure was clearly hierarchical, built around patriarchal warrior elites. As they moved westward, the Yamna blended with local European cultures, giving rise to hybrid societies like the corded ware culture in Central Europe. Corded ware people shared Yamna ancestry, but adopted local tools, pottery, and symbolic styles. In some regions, especially around the Elbe and Rhine, Yamna-related ancestry reached as high as 75%, a near-total replacement of previous lineages. Why such a dramatic takeover? Historians and geneticists believe their technological edge played a huge role. They had bronze weapons, wheeled carts, advanced herding techniques, and, most importantly, the horse. This made them not just more mobile, but also harder to resist. But it wasn't all conquest. Burial sites show signs of assimilation and cultural fusion. In Germany, Yamna bloodlines merged with Neolithic and hunter-gatherer descendants, creating the first truly tri-layered genetic population in the region. Their legacy today is massive. Beyond the R1b M269 haplogroup, Germans carry steppe-derived traits linked to height, lactose tolerance, and fast-twitch muscle fibers. Even the structure of Germanic languages still carries the grammar DNA of the steppes. But just as this Indo-European storm was reshaping Europe, another network of people emerged. Not conquerors, but traders, with a gift for uniting distant cultures. Around 2800 BCE, just as steppe ancestry was solidifying its roots across Germany, a new phenomenon emerged. Not a people, but a pattern. The Beaker culture, named after its distinctive inverted bell-shaped pottery, spread rapidly across Europe. From Portugal to Poland, and from the British Isles to Bohemia, Beaker vessels appeared in graves, settlements, and sacred spaces. But what makes the Beaker horizon unique is that it wasn't a simple case of one group replacing another. Instead, it was a cultural wave, carried partly by people and partly by ideas, a prehistoric version of globalization. In Germany, Beaker communities fused directly with corded ware populations, already rich in Yamna steppe ancestry. Their DNA reveals strong genetic continuity, especially in male lineages. Haplogroup R1bp312 and its subclade R1bu106 became dominant, lineages that remain common in German men today. But the Beaker people were more than just genetic carriers. They were master metallurgists, traders, and archers. Their graves contain copper daggers from Ireland, amber from the Baltic, gold from the Carpathians, and ivory from Africa. Clear signs of extensive trade and diplomacy. Archaeologists believe Beaker communities had some of the earliest systems of standardized weights and measures in Europe. This would have made long-distance trade not only possible, but predictable and profitable. Burial customs also offer rare insights into social life. In cemeteries across central Germany, especially at sites like Saxony-Anhalt, entire nuclear families were buried together. Men were often laid on their left side, heads west. Women on their right, heads east, suggesting a standardized symbolic code across regions. Some graves contain children alongside adults, likely victims of disease, outbreaks, or accidents. Others show evidence of elite warriors, equipped with stone wrist guards and archery gear, hinting at specialized roles in warfare or hunting. Still, the most lasting Beaker legacy may not be material at all, but cultural. By creating shared styles, symbols, and trade networks across such vast distances, they connected previously isolated regions and likely helped stabilize population movement after centuries of upheaval. This period also marks a gradual shift in religious beliefs. Grave goods become more standardized. The dead were carefully positioned. It suggests that a shared cosmology may have taken root, perhaps centered on the sun, cycles of life, or ancestor veneration. By the time the Bell Beaker influence began to wane around 1800 BCE, Germany was no longer a frontier. It was a core region in a thriving Bronze Age network that connected all corners of Europe, a continental crossroads of trade, technology, and ancestry. And from this growing complexity emerged a new culture, one that would raise massive burial mounds, control key river routes, and lay the groundwork for the first true warrior aristocracies of Central Europe. By 1300 BCE, something radical was happening in the way Central Europeans treated their dead. The long-standing tradition of burying intact bodies, often under massive mounds, gave way to a new, continent-wide custom: cremation. Ashes were placed in ceramic urns and carefully buried in rows across vast cemeteries. This shift marks the beginning of the Urnfield culture, a phenomenon that spread from the Danube to the Atlantic. It wasn't just a change in funeral rites, it reflected new belief systems, new power structures, and new identities. Scholars believe this period saw the rise of Proto-Celtic language and social frameworks, laying the groundwork for the tribes that would soon define Iron Age Europe. Urnfield settlements in Germany, especially in Bavaria and Hesse, show fortified hilltop villages overlooking key river valleys. These were strategic positions, control points for trade, water, and defense. Metalworking also reached new heights. Urnfield metal smiths crafted intricately cast bronze swords, ritual axes, jewelry, and vessels that combined technical mastery with artistic sophistication. From a genetic perspective, the Urnfield population appears to be a fusion of earlier groups, with continued presence of R1b lineages and rising frequencies of R1a and I2. This indicates increased contact with eastern and southern populations, possibly via long-distance trade or regional migrations. One striking site is Halberstadt, where a cremated male individual showed mixed ancestry: Steppe, Yamna, Anatolian farmer, and Western hunter-gatherer, all in one person. These genetic mosaics suggest that by the late Bronze Age, Central Europe had become a true melting pot, not just genetically, but culturally. Languages, tools, and belief systems were blending across tribal lines. Religiously, the shift to cremation may point to sun worship or fire symbolism, although interpretations vary. What's clear is that burial became more standardized, even as personal grave goods still reflected family status. Socially, a new class of elites began to form: warrior aristocrats who controlled bronze production and regional trade. Many of their urns contained bronze weapons, elaborate brooches, and imported goods, suggesting wealth, authority, and interregional influence. This Urnfield system persisted for centuries, but by 800 BCE, it began evolving. Graves became richer, fortresses grew larger, and a new cultural expression, one with monumental art, regional kingdoms, and early writing, emerged across southern Germany. It was the dawn of the Celtic era, the next great force in German prehistory. By 800 BCE, much of southern and western Germany had entered a new era, defined by art, architecture, warfare, and identity. This was the rise of the Celtic world, a patchwork of tribes connected not by empire, but by language, trade, and belief. These weren't wandering clans. They were civilizations, with fortified cities, foreign goods, and intricate religions. The Celts weren't a single people, but a cultural network that spanned from Iberia to Bohemia. In Germany, Celtic groups like the Helvetii in the southwest and the Vindelici in Bavaria established fortified hilltop settlements called oppida. These weren't just villages, they were early urban centers with granaries, temples, and trade hubs. Material culture reached extraordinary heights. The Hallstatt culture, 800 to 500 BCE, and the later Latin culture, 500 to 100 BCE, produced ornate weapons, jewelry, and religious offerings. The Celtic aesthetic, swirling curves, stylized animals, complex knotwork, left a mark not just on artifacts, but on European design for centuries. Celtic society was deeply stratified. Warrior elites ruled from oppida and extracted tribute from surrounding villages. Priestly classes known as druids played roles in legal decisions, astronomy, and religious ceremonies. Celtic Germany was also well connected. Trade routes stretched from the Baltic Amber coasts to Greek colonies along the Mediterranean. Imported Greek pottery, Etruscan bronze armor, and Roman coins have been found in elite Germanic burials. Linguistically, many German place names still preserve Celtic roots. Rivers like the Rhine, Main, and Danube all carry Celtic etymologies. So do towns like Mainz, from Mogontiacum, and others hidden in suffixes like -ake, -dorf, and -ingen. Genetically, Celtic populations carried a blend of ancestral lineages. Y-DNA haplogroups like R1, BL21, DF27, and U106, mitochondrial lines continued from Neolithic and steppe sources. Their religious practices were often tied to natural landmarks, groves, rivers, springs. Offerings were deposited in lakes and bogs, swords bent in half, golden torques, and even sacrificed animals, or humans. But even the powerful Celtic world couldn't withstand the tectonic shift that was coming, because by the 1st century BCE, Rome was expanding, bringing roads, walls, and legions to the doorstep of tribal Germany, and the Celts wouldn't be the only ones affected. Just beyond the Rhine, another set of tribal identities was forming. Germanic, not Celtic. Less centralized, less literate, but deeply resilient. And soon, their genes and blood would merge with the Roman world in ways no one could have predicted. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Empire had expanded to the edge of what it considered the known world, right up to the banks of the Rhine River. To the west lay Gaul, recently conquered by Julius Caesar. To the east, a mosaic of tribal groups the Romans called barbarians, many of whom would later become part of what we now call Germany. Rather than simply conquer and leave, the Romans dug in. They built cities, roads, military forts, and trading posts along the frontier. Towns like Colonia Claudia Ara Agrippinensium, modern-day Cologne, became major Romanized hubs north of the Alps. What followed was centuries of intense cultural and genetic mixing. Roman soldiers and settlers came from every corner of the empire: North Africa, the Levant, Britain, Greece, and Iberia. At frontier forts, Germanic auxiliaries served alongside Syrian archers and Numidian cavalrymen. These multi-ethnic units often settled permanently, married local women, and raised families in Roman Germanic communities. Genetic studies of Roman-era burials in Germany reveal a striking increase in diversity. Y-DNA markers like J2 and E1B1b, common in the Mediterranean and Middle East, appear alongside native R1b and I1 lines. Mitochondrial DNA also expands in variety, suggesting influxes of women from distant provinces. But it wasn't just military men. Roman merchants, craftsmen, teachers, and administrators set up permanent residence. They introduced written Latin, legal systems, taxation, villas, and amphitheaters. Meanwhile, local elites adapted Roman customs, wearing togas, adopting Roman names, and even gaining citizenship. Some Germanic leaders sent their sons to be educated in Roman towns, forging a two-way channel of cultural exchange. The Roman presence never fully subdued Germany east of the Rhine, but it left a deep genetic and cultural footprint in the west and south. And when the empire began to crumble in the 4th and 5th centuries, it left behind blended populations, people who were neither fully Roman nor fully Germanic. Then came the migration period. Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, and Lombards, swept into Roman territories. At the same time, new peoples, including Slavs from the east, moved into lands the Germanic tribes left behind. It was a time of upheaval, but also of foundation, because from this fusion of Roman infrastructure, tribal resilience, and migrating bloodlines, medieval Europe would begin to take shape. And in the region we now call Germany, that future would be carried by a rising force, the Franks. As Roman control collapsed in the 5th century, Europe entered a chaotic and transformative era known as the Migration Period, or as the Germans called it, the Völkerwanderung, the wandering of peoples. What followed was not just a breakdown of empire, but a complete reshaping of Europe's cultural and genetic boundaries. Germanic tribes moved into new territories, founding kingdoms where Roman legions once marched. At the same time, new peoples moved into old Germanic homelands, replacing, merging, or pushing earlier populations aside. The Goths moved from Scandinavia through Poland to the Black Sea, eventually reaching Italy and Spain. The Vandals migrated from eastern Germany to North Africa, establishing a powerful but short-lived kingdom. The Lombards moved south into northern Italy, leaving German genetic footprints deep in the Italian north. Meanwhile, Slavic tribes expanded westward from what is now Ukraine and Belarus. They settled parts of eastern Germany, particularly around Brandenburg, Saxony, and Mecklenburg, bringing with them new languages and genetic lineages. Y DNA haplogroup R1A, common among Slavic populations, enters the German gene pool during this time. But of all these tribes, one rose above the rest in reshaping Germany's identity: the Franks. Originating along the Lower Rhine, the Frankish tribes expanded rapidly, establishing what would become the Carolingian Empire, the seed of modern Germany and France. Frankish leaders combined Roman law with Germanic customs, creating powerful legal codes like the Salic law, which governed marriage, inheritance, and property. These laws inadvertently influenced how genes were passed on, especially through male-dominated lineages. Genetically, the Franks helped spread Y DNA haplogroups R1, BU, 10, 6 and I, one still dominant in northwest Germany today. Their ruling dynasties, especially under Charlemagne, expanded into diverse regions, integrating Germanic, Roman, Slavic, and Celtic populations under one political and religious framework. The Ostsiedlung, or eastward settlement movement, came soon after. Frankish nobles colonized sparsely populated eastern regions, blending with local Slavic groups. This movement further solidified the mixed genetic fabric of Germany, especially in the eastern regions. By around 1000 CE, the genetic core of the German population was mostly in place. 60 to 70% Neolithic farmer ancestry, 20 to 30% steppe pastoralist from the Yamna, 10 to 15% Ice Age hunter-gatherer, smaller yet visible layers of Roman, Slavic, and Celtic influence. This period also marks the emergence of distinct dialects, surnames, and local identities. Many modern German surnames, particularly those ending in Zane, Mon, or Inger, trace back to tribal and settlement roots from this era. By the dawn of the medieval era, Germany was not a single people, but a genetic palimpsest with every migration, marriage, and war written into its bloodlines. And this foundation would be the springboard for the empire that followed, the Holy Roman Empire, and for the genetic legacy carried by millions today. By the 8th century, much of Western and Central Europe was fragmented, ruled by tribal kings, warlords, and shifting alliances. Then came Charlemagne, a towering figure, both literally and historically, who would forge the framework of medieval Germany and beyond. Under his leadership, the Carolingian Empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Elbe, from the North Sea to central Italy. But Charlemagne didn't just conquer. He integrated, uniting diverse ethnic groups through law, religion, and administration. He institutionalized Christianity across his empire, establishing bishoprics, monasteries, and Latin literacy as pillars of governance. This process helped unify people under shared laws and beliefs, but also standardized naming systems, inheritance rights, and land distribution, which had lasting effects on gene flow. The Salic law, expanded during this time, reinforced male line inheritance, solidifying the importance of Y-DNA transmission over generations. At the same time, intermarriage between Frankish settlers and local Germanic or Slavic populations expanded the gene pool even further. Charlemagne's empire also encouraged planned colonization. As part of his political strategy, lands in eastern Germany, previously populated by Slavic tribes, were cleared, settled, and reorganized. This process, called the Ostsiedlung, brought German-speaking farmers, craftsmen, and nobility into new regions. Genetically, this created blended communities, particularly in Mecklenburg, Lusatia, and Brandenburg, where Slavic and Germanic ancestries mixed deeply. It's why Eastern Germany today shows higher frequencies of Slavic Y-DNA markers, such as R1A, layered beneath dominant Germanic haplogroups like R1b, U106, and I1. By the year 1000 AD, the basic genetic and cultural architecture of modern Germany was in place. From that point on, wars, plagues, and migrations would continue, but they would tweak the ratios, not rewrite the foundations. The Holy Roman Empire, which emerged from Charlemagne's reign, provided a political structure that allowed for regional diversity within a broader German identity. Each duchy, bishopric, or city-state had its own customs, but the shared ancestry was already written in the blood. Surnames began to stabilize during this era. A man's occupation, region, or father's name became encoded in names like Schmidt, Müller, Fischer, or Hoffmann, many of which still dominate German-speaking populations today. This period also saw linguistic divergence. Dialects emerged, Low German in the north, High German in the south, often correlating with different ancestral lineages and settlement histories. By the end of the medieval period, Germany's DNA had become a microcosm of Europe, carrying Ice Age endurance, Neolithic innovation, steppe resilience, Celtic artistry, Roman order, and Slavic depth. And yet, even with all this complexity, a surprising amount of it remains detectable in modern Germans today, thanks to the remarkable preservation of paternal and maternal lineages across centuries. Modern Germans don't descend from a single tribe, a single migration, or a single empire. They descend from an extraordinary fusion of humanity's most ancient and diverse migrations, each one layering over the next like sediment in the soil. Genetic studies today show that the average person of German ancestry carries around 60 to 70% DNA from Neolithic Anatolian farmers, 20 to 30% from Indo-European steppe herders like the Yamna, 10 to 15% from Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, and trace but measurable contributions from Celtic, Roman, Slavic, and even North African lineages. This makes Germany not just central on the map, but central in Europe's genetic story. It is a region where East meets West, North meets South, and where ancient tribes and modern nations still leave echoes in the genome. The Y-DNA lineages dominant today, R1, BU106, I1, R1A, each tell part of the tale. R1B, U106, from Bronze Age Beaker elites and Frankish warlords. I1, an Ice Age survivor lineage common in the north. R1a, brought westward by Slavic tribes in the early medieval era. Maternal haplogroups, like H, U5, K, and T, carry stories from hunter-gatherer mothers, Anatolian farmers, Roman women, and Slavic brides. Each one passed on not only mitochondrial DNA, but language, customs, songs, and skills. Even today, genetic differences are still detectable across regions. Northern Germany shows stronger links to Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon ancestry. Eastern regions preserve more Slavic admixture. Southern Germany retains the Celtic and Roman legacy that once defined the Alps. But more than the percentages, the power of this story lies in what it reveals. That identity is not static. That migration, fusion, and adaptation have always been human constants. In Germany's case, the genome is like a living fossil, a record of Ice Age survival, Neolithic revolution, Bronze Age conquest, tribal migration, and imperial fusion, all still alive in the bodies of 80 million people today. It's not a story about purity. It's a story about persistence.